Welcome back. President Obama has set out his plans for coping with teetering giant financial firms, but is adding more regulations and government control the answer to the problem? Joining me now from Singapore is investment guru and outspoken man, I mean he's never been outspoken by anybody, Jim Rogers. Jim, welcome back. Welcome back. The latest plans from President Obama for coping with the situation, with teetering firms and so on, and so that there are no firms that end up being too big to fail. Do you think he's on the right track yet?
No. I mean, he's bad for my nervous system. Everything he does is wrong. Unfortunately, Mr. Obama, while he's a very knowledgeable person about some things, 5 years ago, he was a community organizer. He doesn't know about economics or business or finance or interest rates or currencies. No, this is not going to work either.
Why won't this work?
Well, what you need to do is you need to liquidate the bad assets and let people start over, let competent people start over with whatever assets are still solvent, and try to compete. You know, America has to compete with the rest of the world now. We're not just sitting there in America having some kind of dominant position. This is 2009, soon to be 2010. The rest of the world wants to make money, wants to be solvent, wants to do well. And this idea of going around using the government to break up these people, give these people assets, give these people a business, that's not going to be competitive. Bureaucrats will never be able to compete with the Chinese or the Middle Easterners or whoever.
Right, so the bureaucrats need to be pushed aside. And do you agree last week that, in fact, John McCain was on the program last week and he said, but the fact is we told Wall Street they're too big to fail and we told Main Street they're too small to save. It's a terrible thing we've done to middle America. Is that right?
He is exactly right. He's exactly right. The idea that Washington, D.C. has bailed out a bunch of Wall Street people so that they could keep their Lamborghinis and keep their summer houses is outrageous, totally outrageous. The idea that you take taxpayers' money from 300 million Americans and save 200,000 or 300,000 people on Wall Street is it's bad morality. Not that politicians care about morality. It's horrible economics. It is not good for America. It is not good for the world.
So what next to help the world, to help these people, to have a policy that is moral and not immoral? I mean, what would make you so happy in the next speech from the president?
Well, that he would abolish the Federal Reserve, and then Mr. Bernanke would resign, that he would get a new Secretary of the Treasury, he would get a new economics advisor. They would start over with people who understand the situation. Remember, the people who cause this are Mr. Geithner, who's now the Treasury Secretary, Mr. Bernanke. These are the people who cause the problems, and the idea that they are now going to solve them, all they're doing is saving their friends on Wall Street. You want to do something for the American people, you stop spending so much money. The idea that you can solve a problem of too much debt and too much consumption with more debt and more consumption defies my imagination. It defies the imagination of the man in the street. Let them, if you wanted to do something for the man in the street and to revive the economy, you cut spending, you cut taxes, you let the Americans decide what to do with their money. You don't send the money to Wall Street to bail out a few Lamborghinis.
Although we do need financial institutions, don't we? They may be inadequate at the moment, but we do need them, don't we?
Yeah. Well, of course we do. I'm not suggesting we get rid of financial institutions. What I'm suggesting is that we let the competent people take over and start competing and doing things. David, the way it's supposed to work is when people fail, they fail. Competent people come, take the assets, reorganize them, start over from a sounder base. What they're doing now is they're taking the assets away from the competent people and giving them to the incompetent people and saying, okay, now you can compete with the competent people with their assets. I mean, that is ludicrous.
And what about the rest of the world, Jim? Is there any country who has fulfilled your dream in the sense of coming up with a really sensible, powerful policy? I mean, is there one country you would point to, or one or two or three, that have handled this crisis in the right way?
Well, if you look at Asia, many of the Asian countries have saved up a lot of reserves for a rainy day. Now it's raining, they're starting to spend those reserves in a simple way, a smart way. They're starting to do good things for their economy. Yes, I mean, that's not something somebody who did it today. That's been developing for a few years. If you look at where the assets are, all of the creditor nations are now in Asia. China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. These are the people who have done a great job over the past few years of building the economy and building up reserves. You look at Australia. Australia's got a lot of natural resources. They've done a good job. Their central bank recently raised interest rates. They see inflation coming. Norway raised interest rates recently. They see inflation coming. These are people who are looking to the future, not trying to save a few Wall Street bankers.
Well, thank you very much for that update. As ever, that clear and outspoken message from you. Thank you very much indeed, Jim.
Thank you very much. Let's do it again sometime.
Michael Sandel is said to be the most popular lecturer in the whole of Harvard. And good news, you're about to see why. He joined me earlier to talk about politics and morals, his new book, Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do, and that whole fascinating area of moral dilemmas. Michael, a lot of your writing involves great moral dilemmas and so on, and you've listed various examples. And there was one, for instance, where is it right to kill one innocent person to save the lives of several others?
Yes.
And you give one example of that.
Yes. This was a real-life example. There was a group of 4 U.S. Special Forces, U.S. Navy SEALs, who were on a secret mission just on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, looking for a Taliban target. And two goat herders happened upon them with a flock of goats in their hiding places in a mountainous area. And they had to decide what to do with them because they had been found out by the goat herders inadvertently. The goat herders were unarmed, but they realized that if they let the goat herders go, there was a risk they would inform the Taliban and their mission would be compromised. They debated what to do. They voted. It fell, one abstained, it fell to one of them, the fourth, to cast the deciding vote. He said, we can't kill them in cold blood. They let them go. About an hour later, they were surrounded by over 100 heavily armed Taliban. A firefight ensued. 3 of the 4 were killed. A helicopter with, I think, 11 troops that came to rescue them was shot down by a surface-to-air missile that the Taliban had. Only one person survived. He was the one, by the way, who had cast the deciding vote. He tumbled down the mountainside and was taken in a Pashtun village where he was protected until he was rescued. And so he regrets having made that decision because of the loss of his comrades. But it was an excruciating moral dilemma. Do you kill 2 people in cold blood, unarmed civilians, or do you let them go and risk having losing the lives of, in this case, quite a number of people?
Yeah. So he regrets making that decision. Was he right or wrong?
What do you think, David? I mean, these are things that, you know, we argue back and forth about. Yeah. What's your gut instinct?
I would find it difficult to shoot 2 innocent goat herders.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, I think so. I probably would have made the same regrettable decision.
Right. Yeah.
What about you?
I agree with you. And yet they knew, even as they let them go, that this could be the end of them, end of their mission. So morally speaking, it's a question of numbers.
Yeah.
And it's also a question of the importance of the mission. That would have to enter into the moral calculus. But I agree with you, it would be extremely difficult.
Yeah. What about, for instance, in that same area, is it ever, in your view, morally, philosophically justifiable, for instance, to use torture? Are there circumstances in which it is okay to use torture?
I myself don't think so, but it raises some of the philosophical questions that are central to political philosophy and moral philosophy. Former Vice President Cheney in the United States has defended the use of torture during the Bush administration on essentially utilitarian grounds, saving large numbers of lives. That was his argument. And philosophers discussed the ticking time bomb scenario, which essentially is what Cheney is drawing on. If a bomb were planted in a major city about to go off, say it were a nuclear device, so and the tens of thousands would die, and you had a terrorist suspect, would it be justified if you could not get the information any other way to torture him? Now, if you think that numbers are morally decisive, then if the stakes are high enough, because one could say, no, 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 that's wrong. Well, suppose it wasn't 10,000, but 50,000 or 1 million. If numbers are the only thing that count, then there is a case for torture. But here's a test, a counterexample to show that numbers are not the only thing that count in this case. People who are tempted to say, yeah, go ahead and torture him, save those lives, actually, I think, favor that. Not only because of numbers, but because they think morally he deserves punishment. This is a terrorist, they imagine. Suppose the only way you could get the information would be not to torture the terrorist or terrorist suspect, but his innocent 12-year-old daughter who knew nothing about it. Would you do it then? And I think most of us would say, in that case, no. Which shows that it isn't only numbers, but also a sense of who does and doesn't deserve the kind of treatment that is involved. So, no, I myself think that torture is categorically, morally wrong.
And the numbers thing is interesting. There's that classic story you remind me of the man who said to a woman, will you go to bed with me for £1 million? And she says, yes. And he says, will you go to bed with me for £1? And she says, what sort of a woman do you think I am? And he says, we've already settled that, now we're just haggling about the price. That's numbers in a slightly different
Absolutely, it's numbers working in the opposite direction. That's exactly the issue.
Thank you for being with us. Good luck with the book, and come back and see us again soon.
Great pleasure. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Our thanks to Michael Sandel. Thanks to all my guests on the programme today. Next week, we'll be marking a happy anniversary, the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And in an exclusive interview, I'll be talking to George Bush, the President of the United States, who was handling that whole thing when the wall fell. Do join us then for a packed programme reliving that happy event 20 years ago. Bye-bye.